George and Sam, welcome to FrightFest. It's a big celebration of Brian Clemens today, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and you're the reason that I'm here. Yeah,
and Vivian.
And Nick, yeah, and Vivian Reed, yeah. So thank you very much, Vivian, and you too, yeah. No, it's. I was just saying, it's absolutely incredible to be here. Only 3 years ago, kind of just coming along as a punter and sort of discussing with Greg and Ian here at FrightFest the idea of having Captain Kronos be here as a retrospective film, and it sadly, Dad is not around to be able to discuss his movie, but I know that he'll be happy that it will be shown. And there was a lovely turnout today, and so many of the audience hadn't seen it, and it was so lovely to see it in the restored, Blu-ray copy of it. So it's absolutely beautiful print of it, and it's just sort of an honour to be able to have Kronos on, and then Surgery, which was his last idea. His very last idea that he ever had for anything creative ever, we managed to, harness and make. So it's, we're here. Yeah.
Is it interesting for you because your dad was a writer and a director, and now his two sons are also writing and directing and acting?
Well, of course, we've always kind of been leaning towards that from point one. I mean, Dad always said to us, do whatever makes you happy. So even if you're a bin man, as long as you're a happy bin man, that's fine with me. But obviously growing up around all the wonderful work that he was doing, we obviously took a natural interest in it. And from a very young age, he was giving us a free film education. We didn't even know. I mean, the amount of things he introduced us to that I wouldn't have even thought of watching, that you see and you're like, oh, that's The Matrix done in the 1920s, and you think their techniques is brand new and it's something wonderful, but it's all been done before at some point, and Dad knows about it, so we're very, very lucky.
And you just touched upon Surgery, short film that you've written off the concept of your dad.
Yeah, I mean, Surgery was born out of the idea that we have a feature film that we're now pursuing, The Still, which we're going to hopefully do after this. And we decided that it would probably be beneficial for us to have a horror under our belts as directors. So we decided to make a short horror, and when we just thought we had a little bit of money to do it, we had to crowdfund quite a bit of it, but I said to Dad, we need a horror idea, and he went, okay. And I'm not joking, about a minute later, went, okay, I've got it. Spoke the idea out, and I was like, that is truly the most horrible thing that I've ever heard you come up with. Let's make that. That's great. So it hasn't really changed at all. I mean, there's the elements obviously have changed a little bit since then, but the basic storyline is exactly the same. And so we wanted to, as soon as Dad's funeral was out of the way, we kind of went straight into pre-production. Really, I mean, honestly, it was 3.5 weeks from let's do it to we were shooting. So that is really fast. And to have it finished, I mean, you had it finished, which literally you only handed the DCP in a few days ago. So it's been right up to the line. But we've had an amazing team, and I think in the wake of Dad passing away, we've had so many fans and people that have helped and wanted to contribute. We've had people work on the film for free because of Twitter, and funding the film and helping. It's been amazing, really. So it's been a real sort of, feels a bit like a family project in essence, even though it is definitely the darkest thing that Dad has ever put his name to. It's a bit weird. I was hoping it would be a bit lighter, but it's quite dark.
There is humour there, though. There is humour. There's certainly humour.
What's actually very chilling is the score. I mean, the use of Sleeping Beauty. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, basically, the reason we ended up with Sleeping Beauty is we had another song in mind, which is one Dad would always sing at the top of his voice in restaurants, called The Laughing Policeman, which we thought would be quite horrific to do this to, and then we checked into licensing of it, and it would be just Colossus. So we asked our cousin, who works as a music producer, could you help us maybe find something that has a similar tone and stuff, and so she sent us a few classical pieces, knowing that to license them is not as expensive as something a bit more modern, and we came across that and just fell in love with it, and I was like, that's really horrific to turn what everyone's going to think of as a sort of Disney song into this terrible sort of torture scene.
Beauty waltz, that's what it's known as.
Wonderfully. And it adds a nice bit of humour to it, because our lead actor, Nicholas Ball, really plays with that, and that's where a lot of the humour of the film comes, which is very important to us, because Dad always thinks that with anything, even if it's really dark, you always need some humour there. If there's no humour, then it's not really for him.
It's a big day in remembering Brian today, isn't it?
It's a big Brian day, absolutely. And the boys they have inherited their dad's cleverness. They're very clever filmmakers, and they're going to go very far, I think. I'm sure, yeah.
And Captain Kronos is screening here at FrightFest today. Can you transport us back to what it was like working for Brian back then?
It was so special. I've worked on a lot of big budget films and I've worked on a lot of small budget films, but that film still remains one of my favorite all-time films that I've been involved with, mostly because of Brian, but I had a wonderful leading man in Horst Janssen and Albert Fennell producing, so you just had a wonderful team around you. So it just made for very comfortable filmmaking. And it was mostly shot on location, which was beautiful, because I love to be outside. So it was kind of a win-win for me. And to see it again in all its glory, it was magical. It looked beautiful, really.
This is a special thing as well with the festival, isn't it? To be able to take a retrospective look and be able to see a film on the big screen that it was designed for.
Yes, yes. And the sound sounded good, and it just looked great. Took me right back in a good way, in a really good way.
And you're working with Brian, who wrote it and directed it. So what was the beauty of working with somebody who was there from the genesis of the story, really?
Well, he knew exactly what he wanted. That's the thing. He knew exactly what he wanted because it was his baby. He'd kind of given birth to his baby. So we were just the caretakers in a way. So he knew exactly. He also had his storyboard, kind of pretty tight storyboard. So he knew how many shots. He was very economical with his shots. You know, he was very economical. We maybe rehearsed a couple of times. It was quite organic in a way because you could kind of do your own thing, but with Brian very much at the helm as well. So it was. I wished he'd gone on to do more films. I wished he had. That's the thing.
And we're talking about the studio system as well that was in Britain, Hammer. Yes. You know, I mean, that's also something to celebrate, isn't it? Because it's not something we've got in this country now.
We sadly don't, and I suppose, I mean, you have Bond, but it's not the same thing. It's a massive franchise, and very much a family as well. It's very much a family thing as well, but with Hammer, it was because it was smaller. They used the same crews time and time again. They used the same cinematographers very, very much. So it had the same look. It was very stylized. Great scripts, always very tight scripts. They did tend to use different directors, hence Brian, but I think he could have gone on to do so much stuff, really, so many great films, because he was brilliant as a director.
For you as an actor, were you contracted for X amount of years? Because that's something that, again, that we don't have, like the old Hollywood studio system used to, didn't they?
And I think here maybe they did in the 50s. I'm not sure. They maybe did in the 50s with the carry-ons and things, but that wasn't me. But I had a contract. I did have a contract with Hammer for 2 films. So I did the Kronos and Dracula AD, and then sadly it was towards the end of Hammer, so we didn't really do much. You know, after that, it was kind of coming to a halt, and they were having a big influx of American sort of slasher films, I think, and it was a different way. It wasn't the gentleness and the kind of grandness and gothicness of the horror. It changed. It's what can we show? And I took part in a lot of those, you know, in America and in Europe. I did a lot of horror films in Europe. But Hammer had a particular style about it that was very classic and classy, really.
And finally, what's your lasting memory of Brian Clemens? What can you share with us about him?
I loved his humour. He was very, the boys will say, I'm sure, he was very, very witty and quick. His brain was so quick, hence some of the dialogue in Kronos. And charming. He was ever the gentleman, so and a brilliant director.
And dad.
Yes, and writer. Think of all the legacy of stuff he wrote. I mean, most of English television, the New Avenger. I did a New Avengers with him. So yeah,